what's up, everybody? My name's Indy, and the gentleman right over there next to me is Jay Powell from Powell Group Consulting, and welcome to another awesome edition of Indie Game Business. Today, we've got Brad Hendricks from Blind Squirrel.
Yay!
And hey, we timed that pretty good. We're going to be talking about how indies can scale with global development, and there's a whole big story behind that, and it's super interesting. So, welcome, Brad.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's start with our favorite question.
Dive in.
So, tell us how you originally got into the industry, and then walk us through your career up to this point.
Oh my God, that'll be the whole podcast. I've been doing this since 90, 95. But basically, I was in plastics manufacturing, and I worked for American brands, Fortune brands. And they ended up acquiring a company called Gravis. And I don't know if you guys remember Gravis. They were the joysticks and gamepad guys up in Canada. They acquired that company, and I wanted to move over and start working in game peripherals. So that was my first job, and that was 94. And then my job, because back then they didn't have DirectX and Windows, we had to integrate every single peripheral into every single game. And that was my job, is to work with the publishers or developers that were putting games out that wanted to use game pads or joysticks or anything like that. So that's my first stint in the game industry. And after that, I started getting into being a producer, an executive producer, doing actually, I was in the coin op. If you guys remember the coin op industry, that's where I started developing games first, and then moved into sort of mainstream development after that. And then got heavily involved in business development, sort of supporting customers and clients. I was with GameSpy, if you guys remember that one, for quite a while, 5 or 6 years, working with developers and publishers on the technical side of GameSpy, not the editorial side. So we were integrating our back-end technologies, and that's where I got heavily involved in business development, and then sort of evolved that, worked with Gamebryo after that, and they were kind of like Unreal. I think they're still around. They were, engine type game, based on an old technology, and then from there, I started Blind Squirrel literally right after that. So that was a very quick synopsis.
So, were you in California with Gamebryo, or were you in North Carolina?
Yeah, I was in California, the Calabasas office.
The whole executive team in North Carolina were good friends of mine before we.
Oh, really? Okay.
I played on their softball team. I mean,
I
sucked. I was mainly there to drink beer. Let me go ahead.
Well, of course.
That. But yeah, I knew those guys really well. They're actually they got bought up Bethesda. So
that's right. I know somebody acquired them at some point. I left right when things were not going so great with them, and I think an acquisition happened shortly after I left.
So let's we all know the state of the industry right now.
Yeah.
And you all are are you doing primarily contract work, or are you doing contract and unique IP? I mean, your own IP.
Yeah. So we're doing a lot of work for hire stuff right now. Co-dev, full dev. We're doing full dev work with people on their existing IP to add additional content. So I know there's a lot of definitions out there. We're doing co-dev. Some of the things I can talk about we're heavily involved right now with Microsoft on State of Decay 3, and have been for 4 years now, 4 or 5. And so heavily embedded with them. Prior to that, we were on, doing work for hire. So yeah, it's mostly work for hire right now. Obviously, the industry right now is risk averse, if you will, on doing new and innovative IP that's created internally. And we've been shopping around IP for a long time, and there's not a lot of takers right now. So we're shifting our focus at the moment towards work for hire.
And so your team is like my team, spread all over the world.
Yes.
Has that been is that intentional? How has that helped you gain traction and, stay sustainable through this, the last 4 or 5 years, to be honest?
Yeah. So, Yeah, so there's a little front story that needs to be told, I think, too, about that. So during COVID, obviously, everyone went hybrid, right? And so we were smart enough to, my leadership team around me is just amazing. We pre-planned that we were going to be kicked out of the office. So we had already put plans in place to work remotely. And after about a year of doing that, everyone started actually moving away from where we were based in Irvine to other areas across the country. And so we had created a lot of processes to manage how we're going to do remote work and hybrid work. And about the same time, what we started seeing was this downward price pressure from a lot of publishers on opportunities that we're getting where we're too expensive and blah, blah, blah. And so we needed to find solutions to lowering our cost of doing business. And that was sort of where New Zealand and Colombia, where we actually created additional studios. We acquired the studio in Colombia and we organically grew a studio in New Zealand. And so, and we're still in Irvine and we're in Texas too. So, and these are physical locations. So, so that was the catalyst, I think, was COVID and then remote work and then the desire to sort of lower our costs to do things. Plus, there's even a lot of mandates coming from a lot of our publishers to return to office. So that's why we have physical locations on some of our full dev projects. So that's sort of the answer, I think.
So, I mean, do you just tell them, hey, that's not possible because I have people in Colombia,
Well, Colombia is a physical office for us. So we have people in office for that. So, but, when we first started that process, we had, even though the location was Colombia, we actually had people in Costa Rica, Brazil, other parts of Colombia. And it was a hybrid environment at first. But now it's localized in Manizales.
So with folks spread all over the world, all over the time zones and everything else, how do you work to foster a unique, I don't know, team culture? Like keep everybody on the same page and happy with each other?
Yeah, I mean, it's, culture is always about people, right? And every culture is unique based on the type of people you have. That's sort of my interpretation of what culture is. But we created a unique development environment based on the fact that we had hybrid, we needed to be successful in hybrid work environments. So our operations team came up with some really great ways of managing people remotely, managing their health remotely, and managing the customer's health remotely. And so we created, a lot of people hear the word PSRs. Oh my God, that's horrible. But what we've done is we've changed the way that PSRs are being done. And we actually do psychological evaluations, very, very subtle psychological evaluations of our people during the project phase. So that when people are unhappy, we want to know why. Instead of sort of this veil of darkness between leadership and people, we want to make sure we break through that. And that was some of the unique things we added. So when we get reports that we see every week, or every bi-weekly, is we can see health of not only our internal people, how they're doing on projects, what are their blockers, moving things forward. But we're also looking at our client. We're asking our client specific questions about how they perceive our development and how we're doing, so that we don't get blindsided by, oh, you guys suck and you're not doing your job and all the things that sometimes happen. So
I mean, I'm interested to hear more about that whole process. But how does any expansion you can do on that, in terms of the psychological coaching?
Yeah, so we're using tools that the tools that we use aggregate into a central database, which we did create. But the tools basically, like, hey, rate your, current mood, 1 to 5, and do you feel like you've contributed to the project? Do you feel like you're being utilized to your maximum potential? Is there anything else that, and these are all sliders, right? And then there's some open-ended questions where you can type in. And when we see people's, if you're on a 1 to 5 scale, 5 being I'm super happy to 0 being I want to quit, we look at, a lot of times people will be really honest and they'll say, hey, this is why I'm upset. And a lot of the times it's some process or some person or a conflict, and it helps us resolve those problems, way ahead of before we start seeing velocity drops in the project. And so what we do is we take all that data, we aggregate it up by project, by people, and all this stuff. We put it in these reports so that when leadership sees it, they can see trends in velocity, because we're looking at measuring velocity as well as health, and you can see how these things tend to follow each other. And what we found is it's a really good predictor of velocity changes, ahead of velocity changes before they actually happen. And it's been very useful. So we use tools to do that, that we license from other parties that have already doing that type of stuff.
So, I mean, with that, what are some of the major challenges that you've seen? I mean, it's one thing to have someone be in the same building with you and be unhappy. It's something else to have them be
remote
on a different continent and unhappy.
Yeah, it is absolutely a challenge. And obviously there's cultural differences with people like who, like getting them to fill these things in because we do it every Friday. I shouldn't say anything bad about my boss, or I don't want to get fired because I'm going to say something that's going to make somebody upset. Getting people to realize that we want you to be bluntly honest, because this is percolating all the way up, and we're not here to, throw you out the window. We want to solve problems. And if there's issues with your superiors or your coworkers or anything like that, those are the big challenges, is, conflicts of interest or things like that. And we deal with that really well. We have an HR department that gets right on it. They supply us with, with the management team for the people that are having issues, that we get right on it. We make sure we deal with it. And we're really good at that now. And we've been doing that for quite a while. So it takes a lot of, the team has to want to embrace this, because it is different. Right. And I think after, we've been doing it a few years, is that people definitely see it as a tool for everyone in the organization to voice their opinion. And a lot of people don't feel like they have that. And a lot of other organizations where, if I'm a junior, a mid, or even a senior in some cases, I don't think I have a communication avenue, for people, that aren't in my group or people above me. And this is a way that you can get there. So
when those reports start going south, how do you, work to prevent burnout? Because I mean, like, I know as well as anyone, being on the contract side of the industry and doing outsourcing work is generally, it can be brutal, because as the biz dev people, you have to keep work coming in. You can't wait till one project finish and then start the 3 or 4 month process of landing another one.
Yeah.
So how do you, separate that out and keep folks satisfied and keep people from getting burned out?
Yeah, it's a great challenge. I think that that is the biggest challenge I think that any organization is going to have. This being in the same space that I am, is that when you're on a big project, and you're doing that same game for 3 or 5 years or whatever, I think that creates a lot more burnout in some cases than you'd be surprised. And in work for hire, it's like, every 12 or 18 months, we're doing something different. So I think that excitement and the people that like doing that, and plus you get your name and lights on a lot of different projects, right? I think that keeps people a little bit more excited. We do things internally to try to keep people engaged. We do have locations where we, I think it's every 3 months, we have an all hands where we bring everyone into the different locations. We have lunch served, and we talk about, we're very transparent in our organization about, here's where we are financially, here's where our opportunities are in the future, here's everyone who's on projects gets to, here's what I've been doing. And we let people talk about, what they're doing in our organization. And it's something that we've been doing for a little while, but we're getting really good at it, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a way to bring people together. We do our best in the burnout phase. A lot of the burnout comes from, working your people to the bone. I'm not going to sit here and say that never happens to us, because it does. And it's always near some milestone delivery point, especially like an alpha or something like that. But we do our best to try to mitigate, burnout through excessive work. And so we've gotten really good at planning. We use some tools internally to make sure that we can see velocity on our project. And we do a really good job and our production team does a good job of managing that to success. So I think keeping the work hours to reasonable work hours and giving people a good home life balance is really ideal and something that we strive for. In the past, I think 6 years ago, I think we were pretty bad at it, to be bluntly honest. And we just ignored it. Just keep working, and I think that wasn't great. So we've made some big changes in the organization over the last 4 or 5 years, significant changes to try to avoid that. But like I said, we're never going to be perfect. Things go wrong, Dev. Things are going to go wrong that can go wrong, and we do our best to mitigate it. And when we are doing that, we make sure that our people are taken care of, because we know that they're, either not hanging out with their friends or family or loved ones. And so we do our best to try to, make them as comfortable as possible.
I mean, was there any one big thing that led to that decision, 6 years ago, or was it just a culmination of a lot of little to mid-sized things?
I think it was, because it was sort of right at the same time we started listening to our people, and when people would exit, we would, why did you leave? And, and a common theme is you're working me to the bone. Right. And a lot of our projects back then were, we just sort of said, okay, here's the project, here's what we know. And then we start doing it. And then we realize we bit off more than we can chew or whatever. I think our production management has evolved significantly over the last 6 years. We hired some really key people, one of them being Steven Sargent, and obviously Matthew Fawcett, who's our chief development officer, but also bringing on Steve Sardegna 6 years ago. And Steve Sardegna is our chief operating officer and our CFO. And we brought a lot of people that have a lot of industry experience to try to, find new ways to work and create good work-life balances. So there was a fundamental shift in the type of people that I had that were, driving sort of what I would call the days of yore ways. And then there's the new people that came in about 6 years. I mean, Matthew's been here a long time, but we changed the way we were doing things, and we changed it for the better, I think. So the shift was, we were listening to people. We knew it was a problem, but we didn't know how to solve it. So I solved it by bringing in the right people to solve that.
Is your production team like mine, and they occasionally threaten your life if you sign another deal before something else is done?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I get a lot
done that.
Yeah.
All right. So we got a question from the Discord. How often do you all have little victories or big victories?
That's a really good question. I mean, little victories happen all the time. It depends, little victories, or engineers solved a problem with frame rate, or artists solved a problem with, animation or whatever. Those are little victories. Big victories are, for us, and they come in a couple of forms. When they're on the project level, we celebrate, we delivered what we were supposed to deliver on time and on budget. Right. And that happens every 6 weeks with us. So I call those, the little big victories, if you will. And then when we finish a project, and some of the really big victories are obviously getting new opportunities that people are excited about, because we tell people, here's what we're looking at. And that's a double-edged sword for us sometimes, because we tell people about a project and we say, hey, we're bidding on this project, and everyone gets excited about it. And they know that, when I'm done with this one, I'm going to that one. And then it doesn't happen. I think that we have to be very cautious as an organization not to deflate people because things don't happen. It's a very competitive market right now. So there's good and bad, but the victory side, yeah, we celebrate victories every time. And like I said, we do all hands meetings every quarter. So the people that are on the project get to celebrate, here's what we did and here's what we're doing. And so everyone in the organization can see it, and we all celebrate it. And, they'll do movies about what they're working on. And so we do that, like I said, every 3 months. And we have frequent leadership meetings where the different departments talk about, here's our successes and things like that. So yeah, we do that quite often.
So with the different studios around the world, where do you see not only your company, but the rest of the industry going in terms of the development side? We're not going to deal with the publishing side. On the development side, like in the next, 3 to 5 years, do you think more companies are going to go to a distributed, system like you and I do? Or is this whole return to office that we're seeing at least the big companies in the US, do you think everybody's going to get sucked back into an office?
We're getting a lot of pressure from publishers that want us to do ground up development, whether it's, downloadable content or whatever. There's a lot of pressure coming from them to have this staff located in a location.
Why is that?
I think they feel, well, and it's because they're in a return to office environment already. And they feel that, I think internally, that they see velocity changes, more creativity in the early part of the process, because, obviously turning over and going, hey, Susie, hey, Bobby, what do you think of this? And you can show them your screen. That's a little bit more difficult in distributed build. So I get the mentality of that. We're trying to measure that because we have a RTO project that we're currently in-house for. And then all of our other projects are distributed development at the moment. And we are seeing changes where we are seeing some velocity changes, positive velocity changes when you're in-house in the early part. But we're also seeing a lot of negativity surrounding that with people on the health side, because we measure that too. So it's sort of a double-edged sword. I don't know if there's any data out there that says that that's good or bad right now. But the pressure is real. And I need to take those projects, and when I have them and I have locations to support that, I will do that. But right now, there is significant pressure to do that on some of our bigger projects. So,
I'm guessing that it's like everything else. You can find statistics to support whichever side you want to
Sure.
be on if needed. But yeah, I'm obviously a big fan of distributed and not having to drive an hour and a half to the office somewhere.
Yeah.
So as you're doing, I call this running the treadmill, as you're doing contract and outsource work, how do you balance that with any games that may be coming up internally that you want to work on as well?
At the moment, there's a very fundamental shift to focus on work for hire, because like I said in the beginning, there's not a lot of appetite by publishers to pick up and fund unique IP, that doesn't have an established audience. I think that, if you go up a tier and you say, oh, I'm going to go license Marvel or something like that, then there's more appetite for that. But original IP is really difficult right now to get picked up, because a lot of the publishers are focusing on, their catalogs, spinning up, they know winners, if you will. And so I think that right now what we're doing is we're shifting more towards focusing on shoring up our work for hire business. We're right in the process of trying to look at how do we look at our different business lines within work for hire. And we're putting, reorganizing ourselves a little bit to have key individuals in each division, if you will, to focus on that. So ports and remasters, or, co-dev or full dev, that kind of stuff, so that we're focusing those groups on going after the opportunities there. And we're sort of putting IP on the shelf until we feel the industry's more willing to take risk on that, because we developed a game called Cosmorons that we felt was really great, but nobody would pick it up. And, and that's unfortunate. We've had a lot of other opportunities with licensed product that we felt was going to be successful, and we got really far, but the appetite just isn't there. And even these are sub $5 million projects too, sub $5 million,
So another question tying in a little bit to that. Have you ever felt that the skill sets weren't right for the job, and what did you do? How would you apply that lesson to the global industry, that it at least seems to reward doing anything to get a job or a project? And what's the best advice to find yourself in the right roles?
Yeah, isn't that the age-old issue with any work for hire studios? You get an opportunity and you look in your staff and you don't have the right people. That's a tough one. I think the good thing is make sure that your most senior part of your organization is fairly ambidextrous. Meaning that they're, if they're an engineer, I've done, rendering, I've done, networking, la. That's how we've solved it, is most of our super senior people are extremely ambidextrous and have a lot of skill in that. And we use those people to start the opportunity and start the project. But it's not always ideal, because that means that if I only have one or two of these guys and I have, a potential project and I have no more bandwidth, then it becomes a problem. We always try to mitigate that by saying we just can't do this, or we'll bid on something that we know that we have somebody freeing up when the project's going to start. But it's a tough balancing act. You can't have all disciplines just laying around willy-nilly and keep paying them if they're not doing anything, and then hope one day a project comes in. So it's tough. It's a tough balancing act. The other thing we do is typically, I don't know what your sales cycle is, but it could be anywhere from a week to as long as 6 months. In one case, we had one that was 6 years, if you can believe that. But in those cases where it's 6 months or 3 months, we can, especially today, we can usually find resources that are going to fill that need pretty quickly. Unfortunately for the industry, there's a lot of people out there that are extremely skilled that don't have a job right now. And so hiring people is much easier than it was 3 years ago.
I don't know what you're talking about, Brad. I have absolutely never taken a contract and gone, hey, yeah, I can do that. And then turned around and went, okay, how the hell are we going to do this?
Yeah. I mean, it's, what it is. It's usually have the key things that you need to get done. And then it's always something, cinematics or God, all my animators are busy. What do I do? Right. And so, or something like that. And it's not like the fundamental key thing on the project. If it's like, hey, I need, 5 rendering engineers to optimize my game and I have none, right? Let's say I'm not going to ever take that. That would be a death blow for me to ever work with them again.
So as the follow-up, Swag says this is interesting. So leadership should also be skilled at shifting people around. That's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. We do our best to shift people, either if they're unhappy on the project or with the people they're working with. We'll do our best to always accommodate. We're not here to, say that everybody gets along all the time. But from a project perspective, we're doing our best. How you said in the beginning of the conversation, there's this overlap that we need to figure out is, I'm ending one project here. I've got 30 people here and I need to start this other one that's here. And if there's a gap in between, meaning that there's nothing being done for 2 months, that can be painful for any organization to carry people that long. So we're trying to make sure that we slightly overlap them, so that we're ending one and starting another, and there's a slight overlap so that we can avoid letting anybody go. We don't like doing that. So we'll try to do that. So we'll ship people ahead of need when we need to, for that reason as well. So I don't know if that answers that question, but
no. I mean, that's exactly what you have to do. I mean, I'm the same way. So
yeah.
What do you feel has changed the most in your approach to BD over the last 3 or 4 years?
It's one of the reasons I was saying we're having an internal I wouldn't call it a reorg, but we're looking at our lines of business differently. 3 years ago it was like, there was so much opportunity. 3 or 4 years ago it was the best year we ever had. And there was so much opportunity. We didn't have to worry about anything. Just like, how do we staff this? Because hiring people was more difficult back then. In the last 2 years, we've seen a massive shift towards these, downward cost structures that publishers want, as well as other BD related things. And what we're finding is that opportunities aren't in your traditional sort of trade show kind of things. They're more in these independent opportunities. So my BD guy, Charles Milano, is so busy right now. We're sending him all over the world to go and find opportunity to create a larger pipeline. So, our messaging has changed a lot. This distributed global development has changed our messaging a lot. Everyone says, oh, just spin up a studio in another country. But a lot of, it's not that simple. Obviously, that.
Just build a new company.
Yeah, it's so easy. And don't worry about any kind of legal or country-based issues. But just that alone, I mean, on the BD side, there's a message that we've been, at least Blind Squirrel has been saying, and that's a lot of publishers that are on these AAA projects is they want the cost savings, but they're afraid to go to areas that they haven't worked with in the past. For example, South America or places that are new to AAA development, and they're concerned about their ability to execute. Truth of the matter is they're actually perfectly fine in executing. And I think, because of the work we worked with this company before we acquired them, and what we realized is these guys are really good. And there is no reason why they couldn't step into this AAA. The difference, though, is in the production management side is how the publisher expects communication to occur between the two parties, and the amount of data and information they want on milestone deliveries is significant. And I don't think that's where they're not that good at it. And as well as sort of production management things, they just sort of attack the problem. Whereas we have a more structured approach to attacking problems that end up being successful in the long run. And I think that's why the studio that we acquired in Colombia worked really well. Is we worked with them for a whole year and a half before we decided to acquire them. And we walked them through the, if you will, Blind Squirrel way. And they loved it and they wanted more of it. And it was just a logical extension to just acquire them and everything they had. So it was super easy just to suddenly have a presence in Colombia, and which we are now. We've tripled the staff there already since we acquired them, if not quadrupled. And in New Zealand, it was easy. It was one of our CEO, he was from New Zealand. He just went to New Zealand and started a studio. So we didn't have to do anything organic there, but just, going to some country and just assuming it's going to be simple without having some plan in place that will work, and bringing your ideas of how to do development is not that simple. So that's how we approached it.
So you talked about, sending your BD person all over the world. And before we went live, we were talking about GDC and the reality of what that show is versus whatever they try to put in a press release. Are you finding more opportunities coming out of smaller regional shows or the bigger Gamescom Europe?
I think Gamescom is the new kind of cool place to go and find opportunity from a business development perspective, because we found that that's been very successful. I don't know why, because it's even bigger than I think GDC from a sheer volume of people. And maybe it's just Europe because it's cool for Westerners to go. I don't know, but we are seeing, I would say, seeing a very tangible and very powerful opportunities for us in smaller regional shows too, much more than we have in the past. And some of them have been significant. Like DICE Europe is a good example. It's typically very small. And typically a lot of people that are there are, decision makers that, the guys who hold the purse strings in a lot of these big organizations. We found that to be very successful because we're connecting with the people that are making decisions. And then that's true of, a lot of the other indie shows that are out there too, is that we're connecting with different markets. And so, yeah, I agree. I think that, it's sort of like how E3 just turned into this consumer, quagmire and people like us that are there to do business. It was just getting from one meeting to another to get across E3, and seeing all the cosplay people, which is a wonderful testament to our industry. But it just made the show difficult.
Yeah. Yeah,
you
me
know.
too. I still don't miss that show.
Yeah.
All right, so our own Tom has a really good one here. We're going to change up the strategy a little bit. Blind Squirrel is known for their high quality remasters like BioShock The Collection and Mass Effect Legendary Edition. What are some of the biggest technical or creative challenges that come in remastering iconic titles?
That's a good question. BioShock wasn't supposed to be a remaster, just so everybody knows in the audience. It was supposed to be a port. We were asked by 2K to do a port, and when we got it, we said, well, why don't you make it look cooler, because that was when the consoles were going to 4K. And when we first did the first port and got it working on the new systems, it just looked like ass. And so I talked to my counterpart at 2K, and I said, we could really do a great job on just change some of the geometry and make it look like it belongs on the 4K system. No, we don't want to spend a lot of money. We want to do a port. And I'm like, okay. And so when I came back to the office, and I was the BD guy at the time, I told my art team, I said, do me a favor. And, when you come up the bath escape and you come into that room, when you first see the BioShock world, I said, just tear it all down, rebuild it up, do all the current, volumetric stuff you can do, the reflections, everything, just tune it up to 11, if you will. And they did. And when we delivered the next milestone, I thought we were going to get canned off the project, or and we delivered it. And I don't know if I can say bad words on the podcast here.
Oh, you can absolutely say bad words.
Good. So that my counterpart calls me and he goes, the first thing he says is, "What the fuck?" And I'm like, "Oh shit, here it comes. I'm going to get fired. We're going to get fired." And he goes, "That was amazing. What did you guys do?" And I was shocked. And he said, "Can you do that to this, to the remaster series?" And I said, "Well, we don't need to do that on the third game because it's already pretty good. But the first two BioShocks, we completely tore it out." So the technical challenges were, maintaining frame rate. I'm not a dev engineer per se, but this is what I remember is maintaining frame rate. Obviously, we had to move everything in texture to 4K. We had to change geometry to being, polygonal to rounded. So frame rate was a challenge. We had to optimize a lot more. We created a lot of tools to look at frame rate as players were moving through the level. So we actually created heat maps where we could see where players were running into frame rate. So we created a lot of tools to deal with that, so that we could, because frame rate was key. That was actually part of our deliverables. We had to hit, I believe it was 60 frames a second. And so those were some. Oop, accidentally muted myself.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was like, yeah. You got muted on Discord.
Yeah, I just hit my button by accident. So those are some of the big challenges. Obviously, art is always a challenge. We had to rebuild every statue, everything that had, a meaningful moment in the game. And so there was a lot of art involved. But a lot of the core gameplay stayed the same. We fixed a lot of the bugs that they had in the original game. And in fact, I think the Metacritic was higher than the original game.
Nice.
So, yeah. So I think that answers that.
So this is always the question when it comes to contract work, especially on the BD side. How do you evaluate a project and whether it is worth pursuing, especially right now in the industry?
It's, I'm sure my BD person and some of my leadership will shoot me, but
dartboard.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we have a staff, and we're not a small team. We're 120 or 30 people now, and there's a lot of mouths to feed. So we got to keep a pretty good, steady flow of people moving in, which means we need to have a steady flow of projects. I think our initial approach, at least maybe mine might be, which I know will make a lot of people upset in the organization, is let's look at everything. I think last year or this year alone, we've done 50 or 60 bids on projects, and we're currently working on, I think it's 7 or 8, maybe 9 projects simultaneously. I think we need to look at everything, but where we need to say no is that we'll never have the staff that we need to execute this. And so we'll say no to something like that. Like a great example is I need 5 rendering engineers, and I need them, tomorrow. I'm not going to have 5 rendering engineers laying around, so we'll say no to the stuff that we know that we just can't, we can't accomplish. We don't, we build a reputation on, finishing projects and getting them done on budget and not coming back to the table, asking for more money. We don't do that. But with that comes the fact that we can't fail while we're doing these projects. So there are been some cases, rare in the most recent years, but that we will say no to. It's just because we can't accomplish it.
Are you seeing, like right after the pandemic, we saw publishers and media companies really like lock down on who they worked with on the outsourcing side because they didn't want to be flying, or they couldn't be flying people all over the world to vet these studios. Is that still the case? I'm sure that's to your benefit if it is, or are you seeing them start looking outside their comfort list for support now?
I think a lot of publishers are realizing they need to diversify, because we're, even though we've been involved with a lot of people, we're, we've never worked with Activision ever, if you can believe that. I think that's changing now that they're part of Microsoft, because we're heavily involved with Microsoft. So I guess technically we are working with them. But in the past, we came really close to doing a lot of stuff on Call of Duty here and there, but, we had to turn them down because the demands on that particular project were excessive. I do see publishers needing and knowing they need to diversify their portfolios in terms of work for hire studios. And I think that's out of just risk mitigation. And if you look at the market too, a lot of work for hire, companies have exploded. And so there's less of us available that are, that have done AAA work or that are the size that we are, that can support larger projects. So, and we can support the small too. So we're beggars can't be choosers at the moment. And that's certainly us. We're definitely have, some tiny projects that we didn't typically would say no to in the past because it just was too small. Now we're say yes, because we know that there's sort of a land and expand, if you will, opportunity in any publisher. And that's worked really well for us, where we start small on a project and then expand it out. That worked really well with us on New World when we were working on that with Amazon. So
obviously the majority of our audience are indie devs.
Yeah.
And they a lot of times need to find this contract work in order to stay alive to make their other stuff.
Yeah.
Is this, you're saying the publishers are looking to diversify. So is it more friendly to newer indie teams to come into some of these places and say, hey, we have this expertise. You haven't worked with us before.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think more so now than I'd say 3 or 4 years ago, because of the way that the market has sort of evolved. There's a lot of really good people out there in the indie space that, they could form really amazing teams, and certainly, provide that type of service to publishers, and they're certainly interested in that right now. So yeah, I do agree that it's becoming more of a commonplace for publishers, because they can't rely on, obviously you have your keywords and your virtuos and really big guys like that, right? And so they can supply any team anywhere for any project on anything, because they have 10,000 employees or whatever they have. But a lot of the publishers I'm hearing from is they want to diversify away from just focusing on some of those big guys, because, they just want to have more options.
Yeah.
And so I think that is absolutely becoming a thing right now.
So what would your advice be to those studios who haven't necessarily been working on the outsourcing side as long as you or I.
Yeah.
How would you recommend they start getting involved in this?
That's a tough one. It was super easy, and I'm sure it was for you too. You were probably involved in the industry long enough, but BD is the toughest part about, getting in the door, right? And getting yourself out there. If you already have that experience, I was lucky enough to have that experience, as a CEO that I did a lot of BD, and I was already in touch with a lot of the guys on other publishers that were making those kinds of BD decisions. But get out there and get to start at the trade shows and try to establish meetings. A lot of these BD guys are really open to having a conversation with you. And you just got to reach out to them and say, hey, I'd like to have a meeting. We're a new studio. I have, these great people. We're looking at, work for hire or, picking up projects, or we have a new IP. Obviously be careful there because that's a tough business right now. But I'd never discourage anyone. If you've got a really great IP, always go for it. And maybe that's the way in too, is to talk to them about your new IP. And then during that conversation, say, oh, and we also do work for hire. That's certainly a way in as well.
So in our work, when we've been helping indie devs pitch, that's exactly what we've done, because that is very effective. It's like you go in, like, hey, here's this game that I want to make. And the publisher's like, yeah, it's not really for us right now, but it looks similar to something that we might need. So
exactly.
I mean, yeah, it's actually a really, really, really good tool to get in there.
Yeah.
From Tom, is there a game that you wish Blind Squirrel had a chance to work on?
Well, there's a lot of those, aren't there? Well, I mean, we started working with EA on Battlefield way back when, a few years ago, in the early stages when they were just, fixing up the multiplayer, and they decided they wanted to do a single player campaign. And we were tapped to support some of their teams to do that. And unfortunately, that didn't work out. No fault of our own. It was just the US based studios that were going to do it. Just sort of, they couldn't get it off the ground and hire enough people in time to do the huge amount of work that was required. I was bummed because I thought, I think the Battlefield game is pretty good compared to some of their launches in the past, and I think they're doing really well. And so I'm bummed we didn't get a chance to do that work, even though we did some work and weren't credited, and that's fine because it was all engineering type stuff at the time. But we had just finished working on Delta Force with Timmy and Tencent, and so we just completed doing an hour and a half's worth of the single player campaign. So we were super excited to slide into that. It didn't happen. There's a lot of projects. We were Starfield was another one, I thought was really cool. There's a lot of projects I wish we had gotten more involved in. The list goes on. When you're doing this for 15 years, there's a laundry list of things I wish we'd gotten involved in. But I mean, in the current world, I mean, we're super excited about the BioShock series. These guys are doing amazing things with BioShock right now. There's a lot of really great opportunities in the future too on some titles that we really love as an organization.
All right. If you have questions for Brad, make sure you get them in. We got about 10 more minutes here. Over that 15 years that you just mentioned, has your definition of success changed at all?
Yeah, staying alive as a CEO. It's definitely changed. When you're in the beginning, it's funny, you get a little project and you're like, oh my God, $10,000 check. Oh my God, and then it went to $100,000 check and I could pay all my people. And now when $1 million check comes in, I'm like, and it's just, it just pays my salary for a month, not mine, the whole company's, right. And so, but it's just, you get a little cynical because then you start realizing how the industry works and how, from a developer perspective, it seems slightly tilted and not in our favor in a lot of cases. We're the creators. I guess it's similar to the movie industry too. I wouldn't be surprised, but you get a little cynical, and obviously it takes a toll on your body as a leader in an organization. And so success to me is, has changed a lot, and it's not monetary anymore like it used to be. Although, hey, we'd all love to get acquired. But right now, to me, it's making sure my people are happy, that we have a fairly, a business that creates a stasis on its own. And that's difficult in our industry for sure. That I keep what I would call my core team of people, which is a very large group of people in our organization, always at my organization. If you look at, all of our leadership and our, our senior sort of developers across the organization, I have a very high, most of my people have been with me between 6 and 8 years, which is pretty long for a developer. And I think to me, that's success. Is that they've been wanting to stay with us and Blind Squirrel that long. I think that's a testament, and I'm happy with that. It's like a family, but without having a family, if you will.
That's always the thing they say. It's a red flag if you go into a job interview and they're like, "We're like family."
Yeah, no, I hate that. That's why. But it technically it sort of feels like it because we've known each other so long. We know each other so well. But yeah, I would never say it's your family because they all have families. Go be with your family. We're not the family here. So
it's amazing how quickly your overhead goes up when you start hiring and expanding. It's just you sit back and look at it and you're like, wait a minute, I'm paying how much in salaries every year? Yeah. I mean, you mentioned that you were picking up some smaller projects now. I mean, when you've got that much overhead to cover, how much of that drives what your, BD activity is versus, okay, here's some projects that we can get just to cover a few people for a few months?
Yeah. So to give you some context, I think of the projects that we're doing and have done in the year 2025, our BD guys signed 35 contracts to get the amount of revenue that we have for this year to maintain a staff of around 120, 30 people, right? That's a lot of work on the beat. That doesn't include the 60 or 80 other things that we bid on, and in addition to him actually generating the opportunities, which is even bigger, right? So a lot of effort is going on from a BD. And one of the things I think I'd mentioned is we want to reorg so we're trying to support our BD in a way where we have sort of our business silos. So like, let's say ports is a silo and remasters is a silo, and full dev and so forth and so on, co-dev. And we'll put business leaders in each one to support our BD guy to go out and make sure that, okay, our objective is to hit this amount of revenue and have this amount of business and this size of team. And so we're going to try to silo our business unit so that we have objectives that are not solely up to one person. And I think that's going to help.
Give everyone an idea of how long the sales cycle is, not even on a big project, but like on a small to mid cycle. Because I think a lot of people seem to think it's like, okay, we're going to run out of money in 2 months. Let me go get some contract work. Give them an idea of how long the sales cycle actually is.
It's like I said before, it could be super random. It could be literally, I get a call tomorrow and we need to start in a week. That's not as common, but it happens. But a smaller project, I guess, how you define that, but it could be 3 months to 6 months, and in some unusual cases, it could be longer. But typically smaller projects are publishers like, I need immediate help. And typically the longest lead item in getting the contract done is the actual physical contract itself. Having a discussion with BD and then moving it into dev teams, talking to dev teams happens pretty quick. And then if there's more dev teams involved, then it's sort of, everybody gets compared and then someone gets chosen. I think that takes a while. But once the selection is made, then you get to contract, and contracts, you know how it is. Lawyers get in a room with other lawyers and they figure out, how can I make this bill more expensive and take the longest amount of time? And so, that could take a month or two. So, I mean, I think, and like I said, it's all relative to the project size, but it could take, I think short time frames. If you already have a master servants agreement with a publisher and all you're doing is adding statement of works to the existing contract, that could be quick. You could get something done in a week, if you have the people available and whatnot. But typically if it involves a contract and you got to go through it and there's, and it's more than, $3 or $5 million, it takes a while to get there,
Well, Brad, I highly appreciate you coming on and talking today.
Yeah.
This is your chance. Is there anything that you want to promote or get out there? This is your opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll give a shout out to the people that are out there. As I know that the industry is tough right now, and if those of you that are listening that are, unemployed or looking for work, keep your head up, because I think things are changing. We are seeing a shift in the industry, and it's slower than we'd like, but it is happening. I think the opportunities will present themselves where things will turn around. But I do think that as larger organizations like yours and mine, that we do need to start looking at how do we distribute our opportunities across the globe so that we can be more competitive with a lot of these areas in the globe that we are not with, and I mean the West, right? And so, please, seriously, if you're a developer, consider finding ways to create that opportunity for yourself to get there. And I think if you don't, those days will put a target on your back, and so find ways to do that for yourselves. Other than that, I mean, if you're ever looking for an opportunity, Blind Squirrel, we're hiring, love to have you guys come be part of our team. And right now we're still hybrid, if you will, work remotely in some cases, and in some cases we're returned to office for really big projects. So
that's awesome. Fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for coming on, Brad. This was awesome. And look, I am not muted, Jerry.
Oh, yay.
Yes, I'm not muted.
Am I the only one that actually remembered to unmute this time? Because that is absolutely the opposite of what happens every other week.
We are all good. Thank you so much again, Brad, for coming on here. Hey, community, if you are not in the Discord, I mean, there's already people listening in Discord, but there's a link scrolling across the bottom of the screen right now. But it's super easy, discord.gg/IndieGameBusiness. You can also go to IndieGameBusiness.com. If you sign up for the newsletter, you get a list of publishers. You get a list of people that want to give you money. That's pretty exciting. Funding, right? That's what they say. People just want to give you money. Well, I mean,
I like the idea of people just giving me money better.
Just money. Yeah, and also in the Discord, we've got the pitch deck reviews that are happening. Plus, you guys are doing that on YouTube. Next week, we've got April Stallings from the Make-A-Wish Foundation. That's going to be super awesome. It's going to be a little bit later, though. It's going to be 30 minutes late. And then also in December, that's our next deep dive.
Yep.
Deep dive. That's going to be.
We're going to be talking about production issues and pipelines and how you actually get the game organized and out the door. So, yeah.
Nice.
That's going to be good. So thank you all so much. Everyone have an amazing weekend, and we will see you next weekend.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.